Imagine you are sitting in your home right now. You have food, you have your family, you have land that has been in your family for generations. Now imagine that overnight, everything you grow turns black and rots in the ground. You have nothing to eat, but your government is loading ships with food from your own country and sailing it away under armed guard while your children starve. That is not a hypothetical. That happened right here in Ireland, less than 200 years ago. My name is Tig, and these are the 7 brutal truths about the Irish famine that history books hide. Before we talk about the famine, you need to understand who the Irish were. It is 1844. Ireland has 8 million people, one of the most densely populated countries in the entire world. The Irish built Newgrange, a tomb so precisely engineered that on the winter solstice, a single beam of sunlight travels down a narrow passage and lights up the inner chamber. Built 500 years before the pyramids of Egypt, Irish monks preserved the books of ancient Greece and Rome during the Dark Ages, while the rest of Europe burned them. This is not a backward people. This is an ancient civilization who by 1844 had been living under British rule for over 600 years. Under that rule, the Irish had been stripped of their land, their language, their religion's rights, their ability to vote or hold public office. By 1844, most Irish people were tenant farmers, renting tiny plots from absentee British landlords who often lived in England and had never once set foot in Ireland. The rent took almost everything. What was left was the potato, not because they were ignorant, because it was the only crop that could feed a family from a tiny plot of land. 8 million people, 600 years of oppression, one crop standing between life and death. In the late summer of 1845, something began to happen in the potato fields. Healthy green plants, wilting overnight. Within days, the leaves had turned black, the stalks collapsed, and when farmers dug up the potatoes they had been counting on to survive the winter, they found black rotting mush in the ground. A fungus called Phytophthora infestans had arrived in Ireland, spreading with terrifying speed. In 1845, roughly 1/3 of the crop failed. Bad, but survivable. In 1846, 3/4 of the entire crop was destroyed. This is when people began to die. By 1847, known in Irish as Black 47, entire families were being found dead in their cottages, bodies on roadsides, children too weak to walk, and this is exactly where the brutal truths begin. Brutal truth number 1. While the Irish starved, food was leaving Ireland every single day. Ships loaded with grain, cattle, butter, eggs, pork, leaving Irish ports under armed British military escort, sailing to Britain. In 1847, the worst year of the famine, Ireland exported enough food to feed 2 million people, while 1 million Irish were dying of starvation. The official British position, interfering with food markets, would damage trade. The free market would correct itself. 1 million people died, waiting for the market to correct itself. The Irish do not call this a famine, they call it An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger. Because hunger implies no food existed. Food existed, it was taken. Brutal truth number 2. The man in charge of British relief efforts was Charles Edward Trevelyan. Trevelyan believed the famine was, and I am quoting him directly, the judgment of God on an indolent and unself-reliant people. He wrote this, he published it. He was not hiding his views under his direction. The British response to mass starvation was to make starving people build roads and walls and piers in exchange for wages so low they could barely buy enough food to replace the calories burned doing the work. When soup kitchens finally opened in 1847, the soup was deliberately made thin and unnutritious to avoid creating dependency. The soup kitchens were then closed in August 1847. The British government declared the famine over. It was not over. Trevelyan was knighted in 1848. while the famine was still ongoing, for his services to Ireland. He was knighted for this. Brutal truth number 3. The world tried to help. The Ottoman Sultan wanted to send £10,000 to Ireland. British diplomats pressured him to reduce it to 1,000 because Queen Victoria had only donated 2,000, and it would be embarrassing for a foreign leader to give more than the Queen to her own people. The Sultan secretly sent 3 ships of food to Ireland anyway. British port authorities tried to block them. The ships offloaded in secret, in Drogheda, under cover of darkness. The Choctaw Nation, a Native American people who had themselves been forcibly marched from their land just 16 years earlier, raised $170 among their own impoverished community and sent it to Ireland. From people who had almost nothing. Pope Pius IX sent money. American cities held fundraisers. Quaker organizations sent food directly, bypassing the British government entirely because they knew what happened to official aid. And still, 1 million people died. Brutal truth number 4. The workhouses. To enter one, you surrendered your land, permanently. Whatever small plot your family had farmed for generations, gone. In exchange for shelter and minimal food. Inside, families were immediately separated. Men in one wing, women in another, children in a third. You could be under the same roof as your wife and your children and never see them. Disease spread rapidly through the overcrowded buildings. Typhus, dysentery, relapsing fever. People went in sick and dying, and came out in coffins. 3 million people, more than a third of Ireland's population, became dependent on this system. 3 million people, dependent on a system deliberately designed to do the minimum possible. Brutal truth number 5. As people starved, over 1 million Irish were simultaneously being evicted from their homes. Absentee British landlords discovered it was cheaper to pay for their tenants' emigration than to pay the poor rates introduced to fund famine relief. So they evicted them, and not just evicted. After the families were removed, the cottages were deliberately demolished, walls knocked down, roofs pulled off, to prevent the families returning. In Connaught, entire townlands were cleared in a single operation, hundreds of families at a time, put out on the road, in the middle of winter, with nothing. Many died within the week, found dead in ditches, in fields, on roadsides, not from the famine itself, but from exposure, having lost their homes on top of everything else. Brutal truth number 6. The coffin ships. For those who could escape, the escape route itself was another horror. These were not passenger ships. They were cargo vessels, timber ships, grain ships, hastily converted to carry human beings. Owners crammed in as many people as possible to maximize profit. Below deck, passengers packed into wooden bunks in dark, airless holds. No ventilation, no sanitation. Food often already rotten before the ship left port. The crossing took between 4 and 12 weeks. Typhus, dysentery, cholera spreading through the holds. On some ships, 1 in 5 passengers died before reaching land. When ships arrived in Canada at Grosse Ile Quarantine Station, they were held offshore for weeks. In the summer of 1847, 40 ships sat anchored in the St. Lawrence River waiting for inspection. The line stretched 2 miles. Thousands of people dying within sight of the country they were trying to reach. 38,000 people died on the crossing or in quarantine. They survived the famine. They found the money for passage. They survived weeks at sea, and they died within sight of land. Brutal truth number 7. Before the famine, Ireland had over 8 million people. Today, 180 years later, the island of Ireland has just over 7 million. Ireland is the only country in Europe whose population is still lower today than it was in 1845. Britain went from 27 million to 67 million. Germany went from 35 million to 84 million. Ireland went from 8 million to 7 million. The famine didn't just kill 1 million people, it permanently altered the trajectory of an entire nation. But the Irish survived, and what they built is remarkable. The 2 million who fled to America arrived with nothing, sick, traumatized, penniless. Within 2 generations, they had transformed American society. They built the railroads, the canals, the cities. They dominated the police forces of New York, Boston, and Chicago. They entered politics with extraordinary drive, understanding from their own history that without political power, communities are defenseless. John F. Kennedy, the grandson of famine survivors' children sitting in the White House, the Choctaw Nation who had sent money to Ireland during the famine. The Irish community sent aid back to the Choctaw Nation during a drought crisis decades later. 2 peoples who had never met, connected by shared suffering and shared generosity. 80 million people worldwide today claim Irish heritage. 80 million, every single one of them, the descendant of someone who survived something that should never have been allowed to happen. And this brings us to the question historians still debate. Was the Irish famine a genocide? The legal definition requires intent to destroy a national or ethnic group. The evidence is significant. Food was exported while people starved, a policy decision. Relief was deliberately minimized. Senior British officials publicly described the famine as an opportunity to replace the Irish population with a less numerous and more productive people. Trevelyan's own words. The counter-argument is that negligence, even catastrophic deliberate negligence, is not the same as intent. The Irish government does not officially use the word genocide. Several American state legislatures do. The British government has never issued a formal apology. The debate continues. What is not debated, what is simply historical fact, is that 1 million people died who did not have to die, and the government responsible had the power to prevent it and chose not to. 7 brutal truths. Food exported while people starved. A government that called it God's judgment. A world that tried to help and was blocked. Workhouses designed to take land, not save lives. 1 million evicted on top of everything else. Coffin ships that killed tens of thousands more. And a population that has never recovered. This happened. It was allowed to happen. And it should never be forgotten. If this is the history you want to know, the real history, the history they left out of your textbooks, subscribe, because Ireland's story does not end here, and neither does ours.